Welcome to Political Science 1010, Learning Objective F, dealing with the federal bureaucracy. Now, let's begin. The bureaucracy was initially introduced by the German social scientist Max Weber. You see a picture of him right there with one of his more famous quotes. Now, this is the classic conception of a bureaucracy. That is a hierarchical authority structure. This means that there are various levels in charge of one particular part of our government. So in America, for example, we have different parts of the government to deal with various subjects: education, defense, agriculture, etc. And Weber really was the first one who described this. Now, inside of this hierarchical authority structure, you have specialized people doing specialized tasks, and these tasks are what the government does. So the government needs to inspect food to make sure it is safe. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does this with specialized food inspectors. The people that work in a bureaucracy operate on the merit principle. This means you don't get a job just because your cousin happens to be in charge of the agency. You get a job because you are the right person for the job. Now, the third part that Weber described is the impersonality of the bureaucracy. This is an important consideration. The bureaucracy treats everyone the same, which is equal. Everyone is treated as though they are just one person from the country. No one's given any particular additional benefit or neglect based on who they are. And if all of these things occurred, then the bureaucracy would be a well-organized machine with lots and lots of working parts, all of these parts doing the jobs that the government needs to do. Now, for the rest of our lecture today, we will learn about how and to what extent the American bureaucracy follows Weber's classic conception. So first, who are the bureaucrats? Here are some common ideas. First, Americans dislike them. Many Americans do not like the idea of bureaucrats. They do not like the idea of government meddling in their lives. Now, this is true until you ask Americans specific questions. So if you ask an American, do you like the government interfering with your life? Many will say no. Then you ask them, do you like the government building a road for you? Most will say yes. So Americans have kind of a split personality about the bureaucracy. We think that the bureaucracy is growing each and every year. That is not true. Bureaucracy has actually maintained where it is for the past couple of decades. We believe that most bureaucrats work in Washington, D.C. That is generally not true. Many bureaucrats work in the nation's capital. However, most of them work out in the country. So, for example, in Cleveland, Ohio, we have a part of the Department of Defense known as DFAS. And these people deal with payroll and legal services for the Department of Defense. That's a bunch of bureaucrats doing work, but they're doing it in Cleveland, not in Washington. Lastly, we tend to believe that bureaucracies are ineffective, inefficient, and always bogged down with red tape, while in fact, many bureaucracies are quite effective at what they do, and if they fail in their job, it's mostly due to congressional or executive branch problems and not problems inside the bureaucracy itself. As you can see from this chart, this shows the number of civilian government employees. Civilians would be non-military. The orange part towards the bottom are the number of federal government employees. And if you look from 1965 to 2003, the number of federal government employees has pretty much stayed the same. It hovers right around 2 million depending on what year it is. Now, there has been a marked increase in the number of state and local government employees over that time period, but the federal government has not really grown its particular bureaucracies in any appreciable way in the past 40 or so years. Now, who are these bureaucrats? Bureaucrats tend to look just like the rest of America. They are a very diverse group of people. Their average age is 47. 40% of them are college graduates, which is actually a little bit higher than the rest of the population. About 55% are men, 45% are female, about 31% are minorities of some kind, 69% are white. This means that bureaucrats look a lot like the people of America. This makes sense as bureaucrats are American citizens doing important jobs. Question: why is it important for the federal bureaucracy to be demographically similar to the American populace? Now, to put this into a different type of framework, think about this. If the federal bureaucracy were all just white men, what would that mean for our democracy? Take a few moments, answer that question. Moving on. Who are these bureaucrats? How did they get there? Continued. Now, bureaucrats today are selected using a system known as civil service. What this means is all the people that work for the federal government take a test, and the test will determine if they are able to work in the particular job category that they're trying to get. This is an improvement over a previous system known as patronage. Patronage is when you give people jobs because it's politically convenient. So, for example, you become the president, your cousin's a nice guy, so you let him be postmaster general. Or if you are the president and a lot of people supported you with money during your presidential campaign, at the end of the campaign, you give them jobs. That's patronage. We no longer do that, by and large, in America. Instead, we have the civil service system, where an examination, which is administered in a big room with lots of people, and an examination determines what kind of jobs you can get. The examination is kind of like the SAT, but it's specific to the job types that you're applying for. This came about due to the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which is a major improvement in how we hire government workers. It's based on the merit principle. We are trying to find people with talent and skill that will match the positions that the government needs to have filled. As such, we give them a test. If they do well enough on the test, they are qualified for the job. If they don't make the cutoff score for the test, they're not qualified. And this is all run by the government's Office of Personnel Management. So the people that hire bureaucrats are bureaucrats. Now, there's one other route to getting a federal job, and this is what we call, quote unquote, recruiting from the plum book, because these are very top jobs that are very, very good. And in general, these are not given by civil service exam. The president in this case, will pick people to fill the positions. These are sometimes given out due to patronage. The only real patronage jobs that are left are ambassadorships. Being an ambassador is a great job. You get to go live in some foreign country, do very interesting work, and generally you are safe and you get paid well. Ambassadorships are just given out to the president's friends. So if you want to be the ambassador to Tahiti, get to know some politicians right now and start to help them out. Maybe they can hook you up with a sweet job later on. The most important trait that you have here for these plum jobs is transience, meaning you can move around a lot and you can shift your life around to meet the needs of the president. Question: describe the civil service system. How does it work? What does it do? And then, what advantage does the civil service system have over patronage? Take a few moments, answer that question, and then when you're ready, move on. Moving on, let's talk about the bureaucracy's organization. There are currently 15 cabinet-level departments, each of which is headed by a secretary. These are executive branch cabinet departments. So these people report directly to the president. They exist in order to advise the president on particular matters and to run their agency. The only oddball here is the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is headed by the Attorney General. All the other cabinet departments, such as State, Commerce, Agriculture, Homeland Security, etc., are headed by a secretary. So if you are the Secretary of Homeland Security, you are in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. However, if you're the head of the Department of Justice, you are known as the Attorney General of the United States. Each of these departments has its own budget, its own staff, and its own policy area. They're divided up so that we can do better work in the government to help the most people in the best ways. Does it always work out? No, but that's the goal of the bureaucracy. Some things are cabinet-level departments and some are not. And being in the cabinet can be a bit of a controversy, which you may read about in the paper from time to time. Now, this horrible-looking flowchart describes the government of the United States. I will direct your attention to the executive branch. In the executive branch, you have the president and vice president, and then the executive office of the president. Then beneath that, you have all of the various departments, and you see them listed from left to right: Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Justice, Labor, State, Transportation, Treasury, Veterans Affairs. All of those are the cabinet. If you look at the very bottom of the screen, you will see all of the various independent organizations and government corporations that are part of the bureaucracy but are not cabinet level positions. So for example, the Federal Elections Commission, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, the Federal Elections Commission is part of the bureaucracy in charge of making sure our elections run smoothly. Take a look at this for a minute or two. You might want to pause the video here. This is most of the government of the United States, broken down into one chart. Look well, because there's going to be a question about this in a moment. Now, like I said, some parts of the bureaucracy are regulatory agencies. A regulatory agency is responsible for some part of the economy, and it makes rules about that part of the economy. So, for example, the National Labor Relations Board is a regulatory agency that deals with disputes between labor unions and companies. They are there to make sure that labor disputes are handled well. The Food Inspection Agency of the Department of Agriculture is there to look at our food and make sure we're not eating things that are poisonous. These are regulatory agencies to protect us. These are usually headed by a commission of 5 to 10 people, and they do a lot of rule making. So they make rules that impact the economy, and this is a function that is highly, highly watched because the rules that these bureaucracies make are sweeping. They impact almost every part of the economy, and they can have a huge impact on what we do as Americans. Why don't we buy paint with lead in it anymore? Because a regulatory agency got rid of it. Why don't we buy gasoline with lead anymore? Regulatory agency got rid of it. Warnings on cigarette packages, put there by the government, by a bureaucracy. These are actions taken by bureaucracies to help protect the people. We also have what are known as government corporations. These are business-like kind of agencies that provide services kind of like a private company, and they charge for their services. The best examples are the Post Office, which is a government corporation, and Amtrak. Amtrak is our nation's rail system. These are government corporations, so they're kind of like a government agency, but they're also businesses. And as we all know, the Postal Service happens to be doing very, very badly right now because many of us have switched to electronic communications and we no longer send much through the mail. There are also independent executive agencies. These are just ones that don't fit anywhere else, and they have a broad, sweeping range of responsibilities and duties. The Government Services Agency and the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, otherwise known as NASA, are examples. I think we know what NASA does. The GSA is in charge of doing miscellaneous things that no one else does. So if you need to find out who fixes the government's copiers, it's the GSA. So things like that just don't fit anywhere else. Question. Take a look at the chart listing the various elements of the federal government. I told you to look at it before. You might want to back this video up and look at it again. Which of these executive branch agencies do you think is the most important? And which ones are the least important? And I'm going to encourage you to look down at the bottom of the screen at all those weird ones at the bottom. What's up with some of those? Are those things really important or not? Take a moment, answer this question. When you're prepared, move on. And we're back. Let's discuss bureaucracies as implementers of policy. Now, you have to understand that a bureaucracy's goal many times is to implement a particular law passed by Congress and signed by the president. As such, these agencies will translate the policy into a program. In so doing, they add something to the government. So, for example, when African Americans were denied voting rights in the Deep South during the, well, you could really say anytime from 1900 to 1965, the federal government eventually responded by creating elections governing commissions. So these elections monitors would go and make sure that voting rights were being protected. This all came from the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So you have a law, and in order to make the law happen, you hire people to put it into place. You hire a bureaucrat or a bunch of bureaucrats to do that. Implementation includes creating and assigning an agency the policy. So first you have to make the policy, then you have to give it to someone to do. Then you translate the policy into rules, regulations, procedures, forms, things like that. So as President Obama is rolling out his healthcare initiative, the Department of Health and Human Services, which is in charge of that policy, will translate the law into actual practice. And that's what a bureaucracy does. It puts policy into practice. They will coordinate resources to achieve goals, such as getting the right people on the right page, putting together websites, things like that. The other role that bureaucracies play is regulators. Bureaucracies regulate businesses. These regulations are when the government will use its authority to control some practice in the private sector. So in the 80s, we were worried about a hole in the ozone layer. This hole in the ozone layer was caused by chemicals known as CFCs. These CFCs were in hairspray, oddly enough. So the Environmental Protection Agency, part of a government agency, stepped up with a regulation saying that we would ban CFCs in order to protect the ozone. As such, we have protected the ozone layer, CFCs are banned, and now that problem is pretty much gone. So the regulation of business was the EPA told hairspray manufacturers that they couldn't use CFCs in their product anymore. Federal agencies check, verify, and inspect lots of stuff that you do and consume. Most importantly, probably, are your food and drugs. Almost everything you eat is inspected by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Every drug that you take, whether it is Tylenol or some kind of cancer treatment, is evaluated and inspected by the Food and Drug Administration. Consumer products such as TVs, refrigerators, things like that, are inspected to make sure that they're not going to blow up and kill your family. And even most importantly, maybe, the air and water quality of the country is monitored by the Environmental Protection Agency to make sure we are not breathing in or drinking things that are unhealthy. This is all part of what the government does. These are known as regulations. The government tells a business how to do certain things, checks up on businesses to make sure they're doing those things, and then it will punish people who offend. They will punish businesses that don't do what they're told to do. Sometimes the government will set up an incentive instead. An incentive will say, if you do this, we will give you a tax break. For example, if you're a business and you install solar panels on your roof, we will cut your taxes because you are helping us to reach climate change goals. That's an incentive kind of regulation. Some agencies are proactive, some are reactive, meaning some agencies will go out there and look for problems, some will wait until a problem appears and then deal with it. There has been a push lately towards deregulation. Deregulation is when we lift restrictions on businesses, industries, and other professional activities in order to allow more freedom in the economy. This has people that are both for deregulation and against it. There are some good arguments against government regulations. First, it raises the price of goods and services. So, if you are eating food that's inspected by the USDA, part of the cost of that food is paying the USDA inspector to inspect it, and that raises the price of food. This can hurt America's competitiveness, as we have the Department of Labor go into factories in America to make sure workers are being treated fairly and they have a safe working environment. In China, they don't have anything quite like that. So when companies have to decide where to build a factory, they might go to China because the government's not going to be looking into what they're doing quite so much. The last argument is kind of a broad one. Sometimes regulations just don't work all that well. The regulation has a good idea behind it. However, it's just not that great. It's just not done very well. So it just doesn't work. However, there are good arguments for government regulations, such as this protects the health and safety of the people. There was a big recall in the early 2000s of certain makes of cribs that babies would sleep in. These cribs, if they weren't set up just right, they might collapse and pin the child inside the crib, and some children died. So the government stepped in, took those kinds of cribs off the market. I think it's hard to argue for most people that that's a bad thing. And it also provides a check on the power of corporations. In America, we have a bunch of mega powerful companies, and government regulation provides a check on their power. Question: give me some benefits and drawbacks of having the government regulate business. And what sort of businesses do you think should be the most closely regulated? What are the businesses that really need the most government interference? Take a minute, answer. When you're ready, move on. Let's talk about our bureaucracy and our democracy. The president tries to control the bureaucracy by appointing the right people, so he's trying to put the best people in charge. He can issue executive orders to tell the bureaucracy what to do, and he can kind of mess around with their budget. He can, if in an extreme case, reorganize an entire agency in order to get rid of people he doesn't like and put in people he does like, though that's a very uncommon thing to do. Congress also tries to control the bureaucracy as well. Now, they can have some impact on presidential appointments for the people who work in a bureaucracy. They can also play around with the agency's budget. They can hold hearings to make sure that the bureaucracy is doing what it's supposed to do. And if they really don't like a bureaucracy, they can just rewrite the entire legislation, just rewrite the entire law, and change what the bureaucracy does. So they can just fundamentally change what an agency does or does not do. This brings us to a rather uncomfortable topic to discuss, that of iron triangles. And this is something you're going to want to keep in mind moving forward. An iron triangle is a relationship that develops between a bureaucratic agency, an interest group, and a congressional committee or subcommittee. This is, at its heart, dirty politics. And you'll want to understand iron triangles, because if you ever notice there's a problem in your democracy, an iron triangle relationship may be to blame. These are tough to get rid of, but not impossible. You're going to need, the people need to know a lot about our democracy in order to get rid of these relationships, and someone should be working to get rid of any iron triangle relationship that may develop. If you take a look at this image, start at the top. Congress provides funding to a bureaucratic agency. So the Congress passes the money for a bureaucratic agency to exist or not exist. That agency then will interact with an interest group, for example, a business or a large group of people who are organized around one idea, and that agency may decide to not really give much regulation to those people in that interest group. In exchange, the people in that interest group vote for or against certain members of Congress. As that happens, the Congress members then are more inclined to give more money to the bureaucracy, who gives even lower regulation levels to members of an interest group, who then vote even more for Congress, and around it goes. Now, it goes the other way as well. And you can see how that works on the inside of the triangle with the blue arrows. Most problematic, though, are the orange arrows around the outside. Look at it this way. Starting at Congress, let's say Congress passes a bill about marketing tobacco to young people. It will then pass this bill and a certain amount of money down to the Department of Health. That would be the bureaucracy in charge of preventing young people from smoking. Young people shouldn't smoke, obviously. No one should smoke because it is so terribly bad for your health. However, Congress gave only a little bit of money to help stop smoking. So the bureaucracy wants to get in good with a tobacco company, for example. So the bureaucracy, here the Department of Health, would not really regulate the tobacco companies very strongly and just kind of let them do what they wanted to do. In exchange, these tobacco companies, huge sources of money, will give money and encourage their workers to vote for members of Congress who will then continue this cycle, and around it goes. You may say this is crazy, but this is exactly what happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in America, when the tobacco companies were pretty much allowed to market to children directly using cartoon characters and advertisements that were aimed at getting people smoking as young as possible. Now, here are the results of the iron triangle. The consumers are left out. So the people that are impacted by these decisions are left out of the decision making. You can't really understand this triangle unless you're part of it. The president is not in the triangle. So even though the president should have a role in the executive branch agency, he's not really aware of what's going on. This allows the bureaucracy to sabotage the president. It also allows the bureaucracy to leak information to the press. And it only leaks out what information most helps it get more money. So this jumps the chain of command. This means that the democracy kind of runs off the wheel, runs off the tracks a little bit, and there's a lot of money wrapped up with people who are pretty much just helping themselves out. How to control this? You can just ignore it and just don't deal with it, which is what we mostly do. You could try to find the source of the problems and prevent them. Or you can try to strengthen your own part of the power structure. These are complicated things to do, but these are ways that people, including the president, can get into these relationships and disrupt them, which might be what is best for the American people. Question, and answer this one in no fewer than 5 sentences. Please, what is an iron triangle? How does it operate? And then as a follow-up, why are these iron triangles bad for our democracy? Take a few minutes and write. It's been a pleasure lecturing to you electronically. Remember to submit this for class credit at our next meeting. And that is all.